So we have two discussants for this section. I think what I'll propose is that we'll have discussant number 1 speak, and then discussant number 2 speak, and then the speakers respond to the discussants after that. Our first discussant is Jung-Il Yo, who is a professor at or doctor at the KDI School of Public Policy and Management.
Thank you. I first came to know about Airbnb, is it? Airbnb. Airbnb a couple of years ago when a nephew of mine and his family visited Seoul. That was coincided with Pope's visit to Seoul. And my nephew's wife was a devout believer, and she was very happy to see actually the Pope in Seoul. And they stayed at a downtown apartment. And that's when I first learned about this. And I'm going to come back to this story at the end of my discussion. Let me say, as a simple-minded economist, I really don't have much contribution to make here. And I actually learned quite a bit from earlier presentations. And I am persuaded by all the speakers, particularly Julian, that this business, accommodation sharing, offers a lot of potentially very important benefits that go beyond what the simple conventional economic analysis suggests. So I'm going to think about those things in the future. For now, as an economist, for example, when I hear things like Airbnb has produced a lot of gains for the local economy, as measured, for example, by the number of tourists and the money they spent here. That's fine, but you really have to think in net terms. So because of Airbnb, there is substitution effect, and then there is net gain. And then, as a result, that's about incoming traffic, but outgoing traffic is similarly affected. So I believe that on the whole, there are net gains everywhere, but that is a bit simple-minded calculation. As an economist, when I began to think about, after I took on this responsibility, the sharing economy, I think the biggest advantage comes from the fact that the service providers have assets, capital assets, and they have labor, and the opportunity costs of these are very low. For example, it's labor of the retired person, or a spare room that is not being actively used in a house, and things like that. So they can offer these services at a very low cost, low price. And what prevented them from entering the business earlier is that the business setup cost is relative to the scale of business they can conduct. Setup cost is very high, but thanks to these wonderful platforms, the setup cost goes down, and the search cost, the information cost, thanks to the development of technology, it has greatly reduced. And it's a very simple-minded analysis, and I just learned that there's more to that, reputation and all kinds of good things, it seems to me, can develop potentially. But if you think like me, it's market expansion thanks to lowering the entry barrier. And it is in general a very good thing, and particularly good for the service providers who make money. And it's good for the consumers who benefit from greater availability of the services and lower prices. But of course, it's a bad news for the incumbent establishments to the extent that they lose part of their business and or are forced to lower their prices. So while the net social benefit, it seems to me, is very, very likely to be positive, the distributional concerns should not be totally ignored. Such concerns may be magnified if the sharing economy gets advantages in terms of regulation and taxation. However, in the case of the sharing economy, it seems to me the winners tend to be those whose labor commands only a very low opportunity cost of labor, right? So that means the distributional impact is in general in the desirable direction. So I wouldn't be that much concerned. Furthermore, accommodation sharing business in Korea do not seem to be benefiting from regulatory advantages, as Professor Cho was earlier telling us. It is now subject to somewhat arcane laws that are really, dissonant with the reality of today. So it seems that, and I understand that the Korean government is keen on this. The overly onerous regulations should be removed, and we should enact legislation that can really support the expansion of accommodation sharing in Korea. One more thing I want to say is that when it comes to competition among the platforms within the sharing economy, it's because there is very large network externality. Even a small initial advantage can be amplified over time. So it's very easy to end up with a monopolistic situation. Only one or a few large players, dominant players, dominating the market. So it's the competition policy issue and ensuring a level playing field. I think these are important. And I'm not exactly sure to what extent this is true, but I hear that the Korean platform businesses complain that the regulations are, first of all, the regulations are arcane, and they are being enforced in an asymmetric way that favors the dominant player, the dominant foreign player, and they're being unfairly treated. I don't know to what extent that is really true, but it seems to me that the existing laws and regulations are not being enforced very well, because I began my story with my nephew's visit, and they were renting the entire apartment, which is against the law. And I also hear about Koreans staying in with other Korean hosts, which is also against the law. And to what extent the enforcement is asymmetric, that I don't know, but I hear that kind of complaints. And given the huge first mover advantage and the benefit from the network externalities, Korean platforms rightly can complain about this very, very difficult situation. So if that is the case, it should be rectified by supportive legislation as well as fair and symmetric enforcement. This is all I have to say. Thank you.
So it's fun to hear about these things. I have my own experiences with Airbnb as well. As I was listening, something that the question that kept occurring for me was, to what extent are Airbnb options truly competitors for hotels, if at all? We see that the hotels, at least in Dr. Byer's work, are increasing their prices at a lower rate when there's more Airbnb in the system. We're also seeing that they're losing their ability to price gouge, which can't make anyone very happy in the hotel industry. But at the same time, there are such strong differentiators between a hotel experience and an Airbnb experience. As Julian described, it's a much richer interpersonal experience. And in some ways, you could argue that whereas hotel rooms are commodities, they're just seen as products, the expectations are very clear, but they're also pretty unremarkable in most cases. I mean, what we want from a hotel stay is for it to be unremarkable in many ways. We want it to be exactly a hotel stay. Airbnb is much more like an experience. And what we know from recent research is that buying an experience, spending an equivalent amount of money, makes people much happier than buying a good. So in some ways, it could be argued that they are really not direct competitors, but you could understand how hotels might come to see them as such, given the effects that they're having on their pricing and their ability to change their prices dynamically given demand. If that's the case, hotels, like every incumbent on the planet, may become more aggressive about defending their territory. One way they may do it, obviously, is through lowering their prices. Now, hotels have big, huge fixed costs, but they can run promotions that allow them to raise and lower their prices fairly easily. For an Airbnb host, lowering their price directly affects their income. Okay, and yes, maybe they're still making something instead of nothing, but the return on their asset is much lower. So I'm not sure how easy it's going to be for Airbnb hosts to change their prices in the same way that a hotel might if they start anticipating stronger competition. So in general, I think that price-based competition is not going to be very helpful here, and it's not necessary. So what I'd like us to think about a little bit is how Airbnb can continue to differentiate itself. There are de facto differences between hotels and Airbnb in terms of their ability to respond to surges, but those aren't, a consumer doesn't care that much about that. They want to know how the experience is going to be different. And so some of the things that I thought about that I wondered how relevant they could be in the Airbnb context are to follow models, which stay with me for a second, models like IKEA's. So Airbnb experiences, if you stay in an Airbnb property, they're easy because the platform is easy, but you still have to search for the right match, you have to meet new people, you have to figure out when you're getting the key. It's not quite as easy in some cases as checking into a hotel, okay? Now IKEA, has anyone shopped at an IKEA? No IKEA? Okay, it's not easy. It's not easy, and they've given up on it being easy. But what they do two things at IKEA. First of all, they allow the difficulty involved in the experience to be part of the product. Yes, you have shopped through this enormous store, you have found your one bookcase that you must buy, you are an IKEA shopper. Congratulations. The second thing that they have done is that they augment their product with things that are actually fairly low in cost, okay, but that make them different from everyone else. So, for example, they have a cafe that sells these meatballs. Some people love the IKEA food, right? That is enough to make them go there rather than to a traditional furniture retailer where it's much simpler to simply buy a set and find your way in and out. I think given some of the richness of the experiences, particularly associated with the Korean home sharing opportunity, these kinds of small augmentations could help Airbnb remain differentiated from hotels in a way that protects them from competition. I also think that it's clear that greater awareness is a key part of this. Again, as a marketing person, I always feel like awareness is important. So I'd also like to ask the presenters to talk about how they think the word about Airbnb can be most effectively communicated. what are the channels that maybe we're missing right now? Are there certain kinds of networks that can be used to spread this word? Or is there some kind of synergy with other sharing economies that could help raise awareness about Airbnb such that it can continue to grow in this area? So if you have any answers to either new ways to augment or differentiate or means of communicating to the market, I'd love to hear them.
Let's respond in presentation order, so we'll give Julian the
Okay.
first crack at those.
So thank you for the comments, really interesting. We are marketers ourselves, and we do have campaigns actually running in Korea at the moment. So we do some traditional marketing, but actually what we found is the biggest acquisition of customers or partners and hosts to actually come and join the community is word of mouth.
Yeah.
Now that's true for many businesses, and you being an expert, you'd know that. But for us, it's of any business I've ever worked in, this has the most potent, strongest word of mouth that I've ever seen. And that's based largely because I think you drew a distinction between hotels and Airbnb. The experience is what people want to go and tell people about.
Yeah.
And I think the experience is not just the physical of the space. That may be part of it, but it's the whole experience of meeting the host, of interacting with the local community. And I think we have not found a better way of promoting Airbnb than basically having a good experience. And that's the other thing that people make a mistake of when they think about the platforms. Our business is not a technology business. It's not a platform. We are in the hospitality business, okay? And 90% of the experience is actually not, 95% of the experience is not on the phone, is not on the platform. It's actually in someone's home. It's in a new place. It's in a new destination they've just found and the surprises that they get. And so our biggest marketing effort actually is around building our community. But that's not to say we don't use social media. Social media, I think, is a very big amplification that we saw. One of the big things that we did here, I didn't realize how big G-Dragon was in Korea until the team did the promotion with G-Dragon, and we saw a very big prominent celebrity like G-Dragon staying at and hosting on Airbnb as a great way to show the benefits of the sharing economy and in accommodation. So I think I would say that word of mouth is key, and the way to drive word of mouth is to have a great experience.
Okay, I guess I'll respond next. So I thought Dr. Yo gave some very good insights that maybe didn't come across in the presentation so much, but he emphasized the benefits of platforms, that the seller cost and the search costs have gone down dramatically with these technology-driven innovations. I think that really is a key to why these platforms have arisen and succeeded so very fast. I think the notion of an opportunity cost being very low is a very good way to think about the problem as well. I mean, I think for my graduate student, for example, basically thought of it as found money, that he realized that this room in his apartment was just an unutilized asset which he could monetize. So when he had this early revelation and started telling people, hey, I'm making a lot of money on my spare room, this also provides really amazing word of mouth. So on both the traveler side who experience this, have this experience, but also from hosts who say, I'm making a lot of money. It can be very powerful, I think, and is unusual. I mean, I don't think you often get these experiences or these word of mouth lessons which really could change your mindset so much that you're an innkeeper. You're somebody who's renting out an extra room in your house. I think that's something that doesn't come along very often. To Professor Lamberton's questions, when you're talking about promotions, I could see almost the possibility of having a brand within Airbnb. You could imagine like-minded marketers marketing their properties all as having a very similar flavor, like an Airbnb consortia, so you know that this room in this place is very much like some other rooms in other places, banding together and having a common theme together. I like the idea of promotions. I mean, I think hotels can also counter-promote potentially against Airbnb and highlight those services. We are seeing hotels try to have some initiatives that in some way try to have more customized experiences or have interactions with locals or really tout some of the off-site perks that you might have with going to a particular brand of hotel. I think also I heard in Professor Lamberton's comments something about market structure. I mean, I think this is a very interesting dynamic. How is this going to play out with an incumbent firm being threatened sometimes by some stays being substitutes for hotel stays? Where does that end up? I think that's a very interesting question for the structuralists to potentially consider. I think that's all I have on my top of mind deck. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Cho.
No, other speakers already mentioned that, so maybe.
Well, no, just an observation I made. When you meet hosts, I met this couple in Sydney who were in their 60s, late 60s, and they used to be big travelers. And they've actually stopped traveling now because it's not as easy to get around for them. But one thing the reason they started hosting was that they said the world came to them. It was their way of traveling. And so they had people all around the world, from Brazil, from even Syria, they had people from every continent of the world come and stay with them. And it was then, it formed a social kind of cohesion for them. It allowed them to travel whilst they're still in their own home. So you see many reasons, and we focused a lot on the economic reason for doing this, but what we found is when we talk to hosts, they soon kind of get used to the fact that they can get extra money, and then they start to really value the experience of having guests coming from all around the world. And there's something about giving your own experience and telling people about your own area that's kind of powerful. And that's something I'm sure that in some ways is not captured by the studies that we saw. You know, there's the science to this, but there's also the art to it. And that's very hard to talk about without sounding corny. But we see, for those people that have experienced Airbnb, that's a strong element of it. And I think in any regulation, I think it's very difficult to bring that into being. But there is this, the mission of the company is actually to create a world where people can belong anywhere. And that's how we're kind of defining success on the platform, is that people can go and stay and they can feel like they're actually living in a city, even if they're only there for 3 days. And I think it's very hard to capture that through the academic process of just looking at the numbers.
If I can jump in on that for a second, I think that there actually is science that's trying to capture some of this. I was in the UK last year, and they have a big sort of happiness emphasis. And one of the problems that they're struggling with is the problem of loneliness. As it turns out, loneliness has a lot of other comorbidities. When people become lonely, they become isolated, they become ill, they lose motivation to do a lot of things, and it has a huge corrosive effect on communities. In listening to your story about the retirees, the retiree who started hosting for Airbnb, I thought, you know, policymakers who are interested in these kinds of social problems, I think could be very interested in the effects of promoting hosting, making hosting easy, emphasizing to people you don't have to have a mansion to host. You know, oh, you've lived in London your whole life? You know the city. You have something to offer. And I think that, at least I know in the UK and also in the US, they're trying to find ways to overcome these loneliness problems. It might be an interesting angle to push expansion.
If I may, it's really, you know, the experience from the guest side and the host side, and the building of the trust and more understanding across different countries and continents. It sounds wonderful, but I just cannot help but say this. I get to think of all those people who are struggling and finding places to live. And for them, you know, they cannot either be guests or hosts of this business. So you earlier talked about commitment to the community. That community should not only be the community of hosts and guests, but, you know, there is a whole bunch of people out there who are left out of this wonderful new developments. And I was wondering if you want to say something about that.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about the community, I mean, you talk about whilst there's unclear regulation, that actually puts people off hosting. So I think the actual hosting community would be a lot bigger if we had clearer regulation. That's the first point. The other point is when we talk about community, we're talking about the businesses, for example. Like I'm spending money in a place that I wouldn't normally stay right now in Korea. And as a business traveler, I'm spending money on lunch and dinner and maybe a present for my children and into the whole business community and area. So there is an overhang and there's a benefit there for that broader community. In terms of housing, I mean, you saw my story about how the founders started. They started this because of affordability in the first place. They couldn't afford to rent the place they were in San Francisco. So they had to make up that shortfall, and that's how they created the company. They had guests come and stay with them. So I think there's a very positive impact. I think the speed at which this is growing, it could actually become a significant community. We already have 2 million homes listed on the site. We have 60 million guests. We're hoping that that community can broaden and other people can, throughout the community, can see more benefit. And of course, obviously, collecting taxes is something that we discussed. That money presumably is spent by the governments and the authorities and that goes back into the community.
I think it is a very good point. I think Mark raised the concept of social equity when he was talking about car sharing, and I thought that was very powerful, that car sharing of that form could enable social equity. I think it's a challenge for accommodation sharing, especially because the nature of the transaction is so intimate that people are staying in your home. It's not quite so simple as just having a car in the street where people of any background can come and pick up that car. I think it would be fantastic if that were achievable. I think it's more challenging in this space than maybe in the preceding session. Any other comments from people at the table before we open it up to questions from the audience? Questions? Any?
저는 코자자라는 한국 숙박공유 기업의 대표인 조산구라고 합니다. 코자자는 그 에어비앤비가 한국에 본격적으로 착륙하기 이전인 2012년 1월부터 사업을 해왔습니다. 그럼에도 불구하고 한국에서 숙박공유, 공유경제를 활성화를 위한 정부에서 여는 최초의 컨퍼런스에 이렇게 관객으로 앉아 있다는 게 대단히 국민들에게 미안하고 좀 더 분발해야겠다는 생각을 해봅니다. 에어비앤비의 줄리안 국장님께 질문이 있습니다. 한국 정부나 서울시는 숙박공유 규제 개선을 해서 숙박공유를 활성화하려고 하는 의지가 대단히 큽니다. 그만큼 숙박공유가 주는 베니핏이 크기 때문입니다. 이는 코자자뿐만 아니고 에어비앤비에도 대단히 좋은 일입니다. 숙박공유 활성화를 위해서는, 규제 개선을 위해서는, 새로운 정책을 위해서는 현재 마켓 상황을 정확히 이해를 해야 됩니다. 그래서 코자자는 그동안 기재부, KDI, 미래부, 그다음에 서울시 이런 많은 정부 기관과 단체와 미팅을 많이 해왔습니다. 그러면서 코자자의 데이터, 코자자가 경험한 바를 정말 허심탄회하게 모든 걸 트랜스페런트하게 쉐어링했습니다. 그런데 여기에 큰 문제가 있습니다. 시장을 제대로 알려면 전체를 봐야 되는데 말씀드린 것처럼 한국의 숙박공유 시장은 에어비앤비가 90%, 아마 95% 이상을 차지하고 있습니다. 그렇기 때문에 새로운 정책 입안을 위해서 현재 마켓 상황을 파악하기 위해서는 에어비앤비의 데이터가 너무나 중요합니다. 코자자를 위해서, 에어비앤비를 위해서도요. 그런데 제가 지금까지 들은 얘기는 정부의 에어비앤비에 대한 그 데이터, 정책 입안을 위해 필요한 마켓 상황 파악을 위한 데이터 요구를, 공식적인 요구를 거부한 것으로 알고 있습니다. 기재부, 문화체육관광부, 서울시를 통해서 안 바입니다. 한국의 숙박공유 활성화를 위해서 에어비앤비는 그 한국의 독점 사업자로서 정부의 이런 정책 개선을 위한 어떤 필요한 데이터를 제공할 의지가 있는지가 제 질문입니다. 그리고 두 번째 질문이 있습니다. 대단히 아이러니컬한 건데요. 정부의 공식적인 데이터 요구에는 에어비앤비는 제공을 거부를 했음에도 불구하고 실은 에어비앤비 본사와 그 다음에 에어비앤비 코리아에서는 언론에는 숫자를 공개를 했습니다. 이해가 안 갑니다. 왜 정부에서 공식적으로 요구한 데이터는 주지 않으면서 언론에는 발표하는지, 그러면 정부 보고 언론에 발표한 데이터를 가지고 정책을 펴라는 것인지, 그 두 가지가 제가 드리는 질문입니다. 감사합니다.
Yeah, maybe you were out of the room when I was sharing the data. Hopefully you weren't. So, we have 12,500 listings. We have 50, average host is, typical host is 53 days, is renting out. We have 333,000 visitors coming. You saw the data that we provided. Our average host gives $2,800. So I'm not sure which data you want us to provide. We're being as transparent as we can be in terms of that. In terms of monopoly, we actually, we are a company that really cherishes competition right across the Asia-Pacific region, in China, in India. A lot of very well-funded competitors to us, probably more well-funded in the individual countries. We actually cherish and really respect the other companies in this area. We do not think we're a monopoly. I think one thing you probably need to take into consideration is that this is the travel business, right? So people in Korea and people using Airbnb are going outbound. So they are going to other countries, they're going to Europe. And that's where we have listings. So unless you're developing a global business where you have listings in every country, undoubtedly a lot of Koreans will be using Airbnb to go across in other countries. So we're kind of embracing the competition. We work with competitors to understand their business as an industry, and we'd be happy to have a conversation with you. But I feel that we've been as transparent as we can be on the data, and as you would have seen from the presentation, we have a social compact that we've just developed where we do exactly that, where we share and be as transparent as we can be with the major cities and the major governments so that they can understand what's happening in the sharing economy and accommodation in each of the markets.
Who has the microphone? Can we pass it to the next questioner? Please. You choose.
I will keep my question short to give my colleague the opportunity to intervene as well. I'm Chris Bosmans. I work for the OECD. Thank you very much for the excellent presentations. What I do feel a little bit is that this panel is somewhat unbalanced in the sense that there's no one really critical about Airbnb or the sharing economy in general. It feels a bit like a long sales pitch. And on that note, I would like to bring one topic, and that is, do you find, especially the question is directed to John, is there any evidence, empirical evidence, about the effect of Airbnb operating on rental prices and the availability of apartments? That's something which is somewhat controversial. In Paris, for example, that is on the political agenda. There are rumors, or there is talk that rental prices have gone up because there are some people buying property and renting it out to tourists rather than residents. I understand that's a minority of people active on Airbnb, but it might be a sizable minority. And I understand this morning from your presentation, Mark, that around 40% of inhabitants of San Francisco, which is really the center of the sharing economy, are rather skeptical about Airbnb precisely for that reason, if I understand correctly. So I would like your inputs on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's, or is it a follow-up on the same topic?
No, I was going to say that was my question, so I'll cede the microphone back. We didn't coordinate.
I think it's a very good question and a very natural question. Moreover, it's one that can be studied with the methods that we espoused in the Texas study. So I have some students who are thinking about it in the context of the San Francisco rental market. It has some of the similar properties, except that in San Francisco, Airbnb is kind of everywhere. So to really apply the exact methods that I described in my study, you need some variability where there's a control group where there's minimal Airbnb as opposed to where there's a strong presence of Airbnb. So one needs to have good data on a marketplace, a rental market, where there's a control group to really apply the exact methods that I have in mind. I think you're right. I mean, I think intuitively, rental prices should be going up. And there is evidence in the city of Cambridge near MIT, prices are rising very rapidly as a result of people being able to rent out the spare rooms, and that there's some concern that Airbnb hosts could crowd out regular renters because Airbnb hosts who can rent out their rooms can potentially pay a higher rent than regular old students who would otherwise rent those rooms. So I think, yes, it's a very natural topic to study, one that I'm trying to work on myself. I don't have any hard empirical evidence to quantify what the effect is at the moment.
Look, I'm obviously now wary of commenting before it sounds like a sales pitch, but there was one study that I was aware of that actually did indeed show an increase in rent, but it was basically negligible over a course of a year. So we would support more studies in this area. As a company, you know, we genuinely want to be good contributors in the markets we operate in, and our founders have actually said that we will look at this as part of our social compact. And if there is a challenge or an issue, that we will address that. But I'm yet to see a substantial body of empirical evidence that shows that, but there should be more work, I guess, in this area to give some more conclusive results.
Yeah, this is a question to Chairman, Mr. Bayer. Your research it may have deceived me as you are an economist. It is very much about the economics, employing extensively regression models, etc. But you said you belong to the computer science department. So yeah, this is a question to you about your judgment on the algorithm employed in Airbnb. You may have written a lot of algorithm as a computer scientist. And how do you characterize, how do you describe the Airbnb algorithm? Some articles said that the secret of the success of Airbnb lies in the Airbnb algorithm. So they said that that is a killer algorithm, killer application. I would like to know your opinion, your judgment on that kind of claim based on your experience as a computer scientist.
Okay, I think I'm qualified to comment as a computer scientist. I think Dr. Cho gave a good example earlier today. Recommendations and personalization. I think that's the core of what I would consider to be algorithmic at Airbnb. When somebody is conducting a search in a particular area, Airbnb has to identify the listings that would be most appropriate for that person. When Airbnb has little or no history on the individual, it's probably difficult for them to make a good determination. They're going to provide the listings that are most popular, have been reviewed the most, or in the right price range. So I don't think there's much that would be a killer algorithm there. However, when somebody has had many experiences with Airbnb or becomes similar to other Airbnb guests, I think you can apply the technology that Dr. Cho was talking about earlier, where you have a lot of data in which to do very good recommendations, where you might be able to show properties and listings that the person is very likely, through homophily or through other methods, that is a very good fit for that individual. I don't know that Airbnb's technology is a killer, if there are killer algorithms there. Certainly there were killer algorithms for other technology companies that Julian's worked for, like Google. Google has killer search engine technology, no doubt. I don't see these platforms, though, as a computer scientist, really having killer technological advantages. For example, I don't think Kozasa would have a huge competitive disadvantage in being behind algorithmically. They may be behind because they don't have the network or the market share or the ability to have the word of mouth. But in this space, I don't see the algorithms as being the absolute most important thing. My personal view, not very informed.
Do you want me to comment? Or?
Sure.
Yeah, I don't want to say our technology is not important because our engineers might not like that. So it's obviously important that we can match guests and hosts in the right way. But I agree with the professor, it's not necessarily the main thing. It's about the breadth of property, and it's about the experience that you have really outside of the platform that really matters.
I have this observation about Mr. Cho from Kozasa's question. Maybe if you think about the Korean guests who makes use of this accommodation sharing, when they go abroad, obviously they look for Airbnb. Because of this regulation in Korea that prohibits Korean hosts to host Korean guests, they can only get foreign guests legally, right? So that's and then the Korean guests, when they go out, because Kozasa is not, I suppose, widely present outside of Korea, they don't learn about it. So that gives an added advantage to Airbnb, and that probably this problem can only be solved by deregulation, allowing Korean guests to be hosted by Korean hosts.
So to be clear, we would love that to be the case, that there's a complete level playing field. Right? We don't want a different rule for us to you. We want the same rule. So I want that to be clear. And don't forget, the majority of Koreans that go abroad are not using Airbnb. Okay, so by no means a dominant, most people are still going to hotels. And the vast majority. So yeah, absolutely, a level playing field is really important. And I think every startup in Korea, we were a startup 7 years ago. So we're not this huge company. We're actually still have the soul of a startup. We've had some success, but I think we want to see with as many local players right across Asia, domestic players that are very strong competitors. And we actually feel that the more companies that actually talk about home sharing, whether it's us or the smaller startups or even bigger funded startups across Asia, this is a good thing. We want the whole industry and everyone to be aware of it. So level playing field would be good.
Okay, I think coincidentally we're at the end of our time, so I think we'll adjourn and dinner announcement.
Thank you all the speaker, discussants and chair of session 3. So please another round of applause.